Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of the One of the Many videocast with Rob Guzman. How are you today? I'm doing pretty well. So today I got a special program for you. It's a big program just because, well, not a big program, but it's big news just because tomorrow is Election Day. That's right, I'm not filming this on Sunday, I'm filming this on Monday. I was actually out of town this weekend at a conference, an objectivist conference, called Ayn Rand Con, which happens every year. It was in Atlanta this year. It was my first time there. It was a great opportunity for me to meet some objectivist intellectuals that I really respect. I had a great time talking with college and some high school students, some young professionals who are either new to objectivism or are somewhat familiar with it and want to learn more. So I was able to chat with them, teach them what I know, hear some great questions, and we had a great time. It was actually a very draining weekend. A lot of thinking, a lot of discussing, just a lot of ideas. So I was kind of burned out, decided to make this video today. And rather than do the usual thing I do, which is summarize the news headlines and give you kind of a principled view on what's happening in the culture, I decided to cover just one issue today, which is the election that is happening tomorrow. Hopefully I get this uploaded early enough so people can see it before they cast a vote, if they already voted early, or if they just don't care what I think. I'm sure it's not a big deal either way. But if you've already voted and you want to hear what my thought process was on voting, how I voted, why I voted the way I did, and how I see things, and how this election is going to shape things going forward, check this out. And so give it a listen. So, without further ado, let's talk about this election a little bit and what I think about it. So, a couple of points. Before I get into the details, I want to make this very clear to everybody listening. Whether you agree with me or not, there are 3 very important points I want to make about the political parties and the political situation in this country today. Point number 1, neither of the 2 main parties, Democrat or Republican, I think are ideal. They're not, and by ideal, I don't mean a platonic ideal. I don't think that perfection is this, form in another dimension that we can only approximate, we never reach it. I think when you think about the concept of perfection, you have to basically tailor it to what exists, what is real, and say, what is the best we can achieve? And that, I think, is your standard of perfection. It shouldn't be otherworldly. It shouldn't be some mystical thing you're aiming for and never reach. To have an idea of what is better or worse, you have to have an understanding of what is best or worst. You have to have some target that you're shooting at to know whether you're moving in the right direction or not. So I think neither party is ideal, and they are mixed. So I think it is normal to be discouraged, and I think a viable option is not to vote. And I think in some cases that's a proper thing to do. So that's point 1, is it's not always required that you vote, and you don't even always have to vote for the lesser of 2 evils, as some people say you should. Sometimes it's proper not to vote. So that's point 1. Point 2 is I think that voting and evaluating candidates is difficult. First of all, I think evaluating a person, an individual, morally and ethically and philosophically is difficult. You have to know something about them. You have to know why they think the way they do, not just what they think, but why they think it. And it's a challenge. And I think when you're evaluating a politician, you have a little bit more information because they have campaign ads and they write white papers and they go on TV and say things. So you have some idea of what they're thinking and where their head's at. And they get questions, and they get vetted by their parties and by the people that are running against. So you have some idea of what they think and why they think it. But it's always not always a slam dunk. So it's difficult to evaluate politicians. And so I think because this is a complex issue, and it's even more complex because we live in a mixed society, a mixed economy, where we have some controls, some socialism, some fascism, and some freedom, some capitalism. And because you have a mixed world, a mixed economy, the figures in it are mixed. And so as a result, people can disagree. Reasonable people who share a common philosophic framework can disagree. And that's okay. It doesn't mean they're evil. So just because someone disagrees with you on something doesn't make them evil. Evil, however, does come about if somebody ignores facts or evades facts, or if they sugarcoat or whitewash things. Now, that's a tricky issue to determine that. Again, you have to evaluate the person based on what they say and why they say it. But I'm very careful not to call somebody evil unless I have really good evidence to suggest they're evil. So I would just caution everybody listening, caution all people who are hearing me and may disagree with what I say. You may disagree, but try to consider why I agree with, why you believe in something and why you don't, rather than just go right away and say the person's evil because they disagree. And that leads me to the third sort of preliminary point. Now, the conference that I was at, the theme was tribalism. And tribalism in American society, tribalism in the world. What is tribalism? How does it manifest? And how do you fight it? Why is it bad? Now, I'm not going to rehash every talk at the conference. You can check those out on YouTube under the Ayn Rand Institute's YouTube channel. And it's interesting to check those out if you're interested in the idea of tribalism and what it is. But a couple of interesting points about it that came out of this conference are relevant to this election. So tribalism is a variant of collectivism. It's a variant of seeing people as groups and not as individuals. So collectivism is the philosophic idea that the group is more real than the individual. The group has more substance, has more moral worth than the individual, those individuals that comprise the group. So tribalism is a piece of collectivism. It's a subset of collectivism, and it's what's called non-cognitive collectivism. It's collectivism based on something that you didn't choose, and which in fact is not relevant to your character or your ideas. So for example, if I join a group based on my race, on my gender, on my skin color, on my hair color, on where I was born, what city I was born in, those are all variants of tribalism. Because you don't choose any of these things. I mean, you can dye your hair, so I guess that's one thing you could choose. But you don't choose to be born white or black. You don't choose to be gay or straight. You don't choose to, as far as we know, as far as the science that I'm familiar with goes, you don't know these things. You don't choose these things. And so because you can't choose it, it is not a moral decision. It's not a moral. It's not a standard morality by which you can judge a person. And so to join a group on such a frivolous and trivial thing is tribalism. It's basically throwing out ideas, saying ideas don't matter. I'm going to go with what is perceptually similar to me. I'm going to go along with people who kind of look like me. And if they look like me, they maybe like me. Maybe they have my values. But that's not true. It's not valid. People are individuals. They have free will. You can be born in one area and have a completely different view of things than the other people born in that area. You can be born a man and see things differently than other men. And you can be born a woman and likewise not see things the same way that other women see them. So tribalism is something you have to be wary of. And in politics, individualists like me can be suckered into being tribalists. So I'm going to try my best not to be a tribalist on this decision as to who to vote for. It's important, in other words, that you start with ideas. You start with what is true, what is good. You think about that as an individual. You say, what are the facts? What is real? What is true? What do I value? Once you reach those points and you've made that decision, then you can start joining groups based on those values. You can say, I want to join a soccer team because I have as a value the game of soccer. I want to have good physical fitness. I want to learn how to play. I want to join a team and I really enjoy this activity. These people enjoy this activity as well. We have the same goals. We have the same values. And so we cooperate and join the group. That's very different from a tribalist who starts with the group and then infers the ideas from the group. So you understand, there's a sort of two different ways you can go about this. You can either join a group based on your ideas, which you form before you join. That is not tribalism. That is seeking out people who share your values. Or you can join the group first. You can say, believe women, or whites, go all the way with whites, or Black Lives Matter, yeah. You can join a group based on a demographic, a perceptual similarity you have, and then say, well, okay, they look like me, maybe they have my ideas, maybe they share my values, and that's not always true. So I think it's important to untangle what are your values from what is your identity, your physical and your lineage, how you look. So those are some important points to consider in any election. So that's kind of a quick ground rule kind of thing to be cautious of. Now, I want to talk, one more thing I want to talk about is, and it's relevant in my analysis of the election, and that is, what did Ayn Rand think about elections and voting for candidates in a mixed economy? Now, this is interesting, even if you're not a fan of Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand was an individualist. She is a huge inspiration for my philosophy. And so I am curious, what does she think about this? How did she vote? Now, if Ayn Rand votes a certain way, it doesn't mean I should vote a certain way. That's an argument from authority. But if I listen to how she votes and give her reasons for why she voted the way she did, it's an interesting perspective, and it's something that I take seriously. So this is sort of an interesting case study, because Ayn Rand had 2 elections. Well, she had opinions on lots of elections, but there were 2 elections in the past that I think are kind of similar in some ways to how I analyze today's elections. So the first election I want to talk about that she had a really strong opinion on was the election of 1972, which was Richard Nixon versus George McGovern. Okay, Richard Nixon, Republican, George McGovern, the Democrat. And she voted for Nixon, advocated voting for Nixon, and said McGovern must be defeated. Now, why should McGovern be defeated? Well, she wasn't a fan of Nixon. Nixon wasn't a good free market capitalist. He wasn't an individualist. He was a mixed case. He was a pragmatist. But McGovern was far worse. McGovern was the candidate of the New Left. McGovern was the first candidate, in fact, who basically had the values and was the candidate of those rebels, those people in the 60s who basically were coming out of universities, and they were all Marxists, postmodernists, and they were very, very anti-American. They were anti-individualistic, and they were nihilistic. They were anti-value. They railed against gentrification. They didn't want to see people's standard of living go up. They were all about fighting the man, fighting the power, fighting the system. And so they really broke with the old left, which were the more old school, more intellectual Marxists. These activists, these campus activists, were not intellectuals. They basically scorned the intellect. They went by their feelings, by their whims. And McGovern was their man. He was their candidate. Now, Rand saw this as very dangerous to American culture, and she said, vote against Nixon, vote against McGovern, vote for Nixon. So she called herself an anti-Nixonite for Nixon, which is a great term. But she basically advocated voting against Nixon. Now, of course, Nixon won that election in a landslide, so she got her wish. Now, the other election she had a strong opinion on was the election of 1980, which was the election of Ronald Reagan versus Carter. Now, Ronald Reagan was a conservative, and he did talk a good game on free market economics. The problem she saw with Reagan, in this election she actually said you shouldn't vote for Carter, or you shouldn't vote for Reagan, you should vote for Carter. Reagan should be defeated. The problem was that Reagan was bringing in to the Republican Party the religious right, the long since dormant religious right that, were not compatible with capitalism. They were represented by people like Jerry Falwell, and they basically came in with this idea of, we want to bring moral values, family values back into American society. And Ayn Rand saw this as a huge dog whistle, a huge threat, basically saying they're going to outlaw abortion, they're going to mandate prayer in school, they're going to try to chip away at the First Amendment and bring religion back into the public, into the government, into our way of governing. So she saw this as a huge threat, and she said you should vote against Reagan. Now, Reagan won that election. He also won again in '84, and I think she was right about that. I think that Reagan's election did embolden the evangelicals and the radical Republican religious right. They did come back into American politics, and you saw their influence even all the way up until the election of 2000 under George W. Bush. And even during his presidency, the neoconservatives and the religious right were his really strong supporters. And to this day, they have kind of simmered down. You don't really see them as much of a force in American politics since they were defeated by Obama in 2008. More on him in a minute, what I think about him a little bit. But one thing I will say is I think she was right in both cases. I think that Nixon was the better choice, and I think that it was better not to have Reagan win the 1980 election, although I think that's actually very controversial. I am not certain on that latter point. I don't know as much about Reagan as I do about Nixon. I actually did a report on Nixon. He was a president I had to know all about in like 5th grade, so I know a lot about Nixon, actually. It's that damn memory, man. But what I will say is I think Rand's perspective is interesting, And one thing you can take away from it is that in both cases, Rand was rejecting not something based on a short-term calculation. She wasn't looking at her tax statements in the next 1 year and saying, this guy's going to cut my taxes, this guy's going to, give me some better freedom in the short term. But she's looking at who is the longer-term threat philosophically. Which side is more philosophically integrated? And if it's integrated for the good, you should vote for the good. And if it's philosophically integrated for the evil, you should vote against the evil. And so McGovern was clearly more philosophically integrated than Nixon. Nixon was a complete pragmatist. He didn't have a really strong view on a lot of things, and he kind of changed his position. And in fact, Nixon did go on to, create the EPA. He did increase taxes. He created the what was it? It wasn't the FDA. Maybe it was the FDA. One of these government organizations. I'm blanking on it. Nixon did actually go and create it. So Nixon expanded government power as much as he did some good conservative things. But McGovern was philosophically integrated to systematically destabilize the American Constitution and replace it with a leftist view of the world, a postmodern view of the world. Now, you could say that Reagan had a similar thing going on. Reagan was backed by philosophically integrated forces, the religious right, far more intellectual, far more philosophically consistent than Carter, who was a mixed economy, kind of do-nothing president. So I'll say that I think that that's a good principle. And so when I look at today's landscape, when I look at the candidates in today's race, it's not the presidential election we're talking about this year, it's the congressional elections, House of Representatives, Senate, and then local races like governorships, mayor, and so on. Now, let's consider the two sides and try to examine what they've done in the last 2 years since the last election, the last presidential election. So I'm going to start with the Democrats. And I think the Democrats have, and again, when we assess the Democrats, we have to look back not just this last few weeks or these last few months during the last election, the lead up to the election. Let's consider them since 2016, and even before that. Let's talk about where they've been trending and where they're going. What's their view? What's the philosophy that animates them? So I think since Obama was president, we have seen the new left in American politics really take over the Democratic Party. I mean, we're talking complete postmodernism has basically become the mainstream of the Democratic Party, to the point where identity politics has gone nuts. I've covered this in my show many times in the past, so I'm not going to give you lots of examples. But we've got things like Black Lives Matter. We've got things like, the rise of Antifa, the rise of deplatforming, the trend of going to university campuses and shooing off conservative or libertarian speakers, non-leftist speakers. That's a new development that didn't occur before Obama. Obama brought us Black Lives Matter, as I said. We had the women's marches and the protests against so-called patriarchy. That was a new development that didn't occur before Obama. We've got complete and utter happy acceptance of socialism. Look at Jim Carrey going on TV saying the Democrats have to say yes to socialism, and no Democrat really speaking out against him on that. We've got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, this New York House of Rep candidate who's basically advocating socialism on TV. A millennial, someone who's my age, advocating socialism, claiming that it's the right thing to do, completely ignorant of economics and history. We've got Bernie Sanders, of course, been a long-time socialist, democratic socialist. And it's not even like they really hide it anymore. They are consistent in their complete wanting to move towards socialism. So I see that as very bad. And I think it's even worse because the Democrats, for the most part, have won when it comes to the culture. They control the media, they control the universities, they control local governments, and they control all the regulatory agencies and bodies, except for the things that the president runs. But even there, they have infiltrated, and they've got lots of people in middle positions that the president really can't remove. We don't vote on it. It's hard to get rid of those people. So I think the Democrats are a huge threat, and I think they're integrated. I think that they are integrated. I'll backpedal on that a little bit. I don't think they're fully integrated. They're not all integrated because I don't think you can be a really integrated postmodernist because it's just such a disintegrated philosophy. But I do think that they have several principles and they're consistent. They're consistent altruists. They're consistent socialists. And I think that in their ethics, their altruism says we need to sacrifice. We should have a society that encourages sacrifice, whether it's sacrifice to immigrants who need, whether it's sacrifice to the poor in this country who need. They are consistent in their approach. And I think we've even seen them in the lead up to the election get worse on that. We've seen a complete temper tantrum in New York and Washington. We've seen temper tantrums in the streets. I mean, I work in a company where I feel sometimes I can't say what I believe or think, that I'm muzzled because of social justice warrior activists who are everywhere and make everything political. Look at the NFL kneelers making sports political. Look at the Kavanaugh hearings, where they basically made the appointment of a Supreme Court justice into a circus, basically throwing out innocent until proven guilty and making tribalism, making identity politics their number one factor in everything they do and everything they want to achieve. So I think the Democrats are a huge threat. I think they're philosophically integrated. Now that leaves me to the Republicans. I'm not going to say I'm a Republican. I don't actually think the Republicans are really coherent. This is an important point. I don't think the Republicans are integrated. I think the Republicans are in the middle of a split, a soul split that began with Trump, maybe occurred a few years before Trump took hold, but I think we still see a little bit of a tension between the Republicans who are a little more old school, who are a little bit more afraid of Trump's nationalism and his complete hatred of immigration and all the other things that Trump stands for, like tariffs, things that are bad, okay? And then the Trumpites, the people who are basically, let's go for America first, but they don't know what America means. They don't know what it means to be an American. They think it means that you're born here. They're tribalists on that point. And they will follow Trump no matter what he says. They don't care that he lies. They don't care that he bends the truth. They don't care that he's not really integrated and doesn't following a really pure prescription for what he wants to do. He has no clear agenda. He's a complete pragmatist in that sense, even more so than Carter was or Nixon was. And I think there are a couple of examples of things that he's done that I'm not a fan of, right? I'm not a fan of the tariffs. Okay, I don't think we can win a trade war with China. I don't think we should try to win a trade war with China. We lose. The American people lose if we do that. I don't think he's right on immigration, although I'm not a complete open borders person, and I do think there need to be restrictions on immigration. That's a totally different issue. We can talk about that in another video, but I don't think he's totally right on immigration. I think that he really failed to get rid of Obamacare, which is a big problem I had with Obama and his administration. They didn't even really try to get rid of it. He went from saying that they should get rid of it to they should repeal and replace it. So he wanted to create another government handout system that would just replace it and keep the same principle in mind. So on healthcare, he failed us. He didn't bring us out of that, and he claimed he would. Iran, he said we'd pull out of the Iran deal. He said we would be harsher on Iran. And here he is simply saying he's going to put more sanctions on them, do the same thing that Obama did, that Bush did. But he's not really fulfilling what I wanted him to do, which was to stand morally and say, Iran is an evil theocracy, we don't deal with that. And if not, nuke it, not get rid of it and go to war with it. Like, we've been at war with them for decades, and we've kind of just been letting them train terrorists and fund these proxies. Rather than address that head on and at least say, this is the enemy of the American. This is the new evil empire, like Reagan said about the USSR. He's kind of just been mealy-mouthed about it and said, "Oh, I'll deal with it. I'll deal with it." But he hasn't. Okay, and his fawning over the North Korean dictator is also pretty nauseating. I mean, these are all things like, now that I'm listing all this stuff and I'm thinking about it, and you've got the Democrats doing these horrible things and Trump doing these horrible things, and you got to ask yourself, maybe I shouldn't vote for either of them. And like I said earlier, I think that's a viable option. I think that if you come to that conclusion and want to just abstain, I think that's perfectly fine. But again, I do think that. Like I said, this is a complex issue. It's difficult to evaluate who's worse. But they're both bad. But what I will say is that I don't think all the Republicans share Trump's views. There are Republicans who are anti-tariff. Ben Sass is a great example. They've come out against Trump on that issue. There are lots of conservative commentators, Republicans, who basically criticize Trump all the time. This is something we didn't really see under Obama. In fact, in the areas we did see Obama get criticized by the left, it was because he wasn't going left enough. He wasn't going extreme enough. He was compromised. He would compromise with the Republicans, who were doing a pretty good job, I think, as an opposition party. Today, what we have are not Republicans criticizing Trump, saying he's not doing enough tariffs and doing enough Trump stuff. They're saying he's going in the totally wrong direction, and they're trying to pull him back away from that. So I think that the Republican Party is more divided. It's a little bit more ideologically nebulous, doesn't have a really good integrating principle. At this point, it's more of a coalition or a faction party than anything else. And so I think there is still a battle raging for the soul of the Republican Party. And so I think that it can be saved. I don't think that we need necessarily to save it, but I do think that it's in better shape than the Democrats. The Democrats are integrated around an evil idea, postmodernism and socialism. The right is not integrated. They are basically kind of just anti-left. That's their view. And some of them are white nationalists, a very small percentage, I might add. And that's the other thing. The Democratic control of the media has exaggerated the so-called alt-right phenomenon. I don't think that it's anywhere near as bad. And this is actually something I disagree with a lot of objectivist intellectuals on. When I was at Ayn Rand Con, I would wince a few times when people were talking about racism and how it's so horrible in America. I mean, I don't see that at all. I think there's really no evidence for that. I've made that clear in my earlier views. I think they're 20 or 30 years too late on that. I think that they're not really seeing the same facts I am, or at least they've come to a different conclusion. But I do think that the Democrats are racist because they are taking into account race as part of their identity politics program. I think that they're very dangerous. I think that if they get power, we ain't seen nothing yet. If you think the Kavanaugh hearings were bad, if you think the women's marches were bad, if you think all of the protests, if you think the chilling effect on social media is bad, if you think that it's rough going to work every day and having people tell you that you're evil, that you're a transphobe, that you're a misogynist, you think that's bad, wait till they're in power again. Then it gets even worse. Now, my thinking is this. 2020 is 2 years away. I don't know who to vote for. I don't even know who will be running. We'll see what happens in the interim. If it's again a Hillary versus Trump matchup, I don't think it will be exactly that. We'll have to assess it on its merits. But for where we are right now, Trump's a mixed case. I think that overall he's negative and he's a bad guy. But I don't think the party is bad. And I don't think a lot of the Republican senators and House people are going to really just go along with everything Trump says. So I don't think that it's wrong in this election to vote Republican. In fact, that's what I plan on doing. I plan on voting Republican pretty much down the ballot. Now, granted, I live in New York, where it won't really matter, but at least I'm sending a message that I don't approve of the Democrats. Even in a blue state, I think you have to make it clear that you are not on board with identity politics, that America is not a place where racism in the form of identity politics being practiced against a previously, injured group is okay, and that it's just going to be part of our culture now. This is the new normal. You have to fight that, and I think that, again, borrowing that same principle from Ayn Rand, you have to oppose the more intellectually consistent evil. Oh, I guess put it this way. You have to first back the best consistent integrated case, if it exists. If there were a capitalist party, if there were a party that was for individual rights, vote for them first. You got to throw support behind the positive. It's harder to make a positive case for something than it is to knock down a negative for it. So go with the positive if it exists. If there is no positive, you have to go against the more integrated philosophical evil. And in this case, I think it's the Democrats. So again, happy to hear other views on this. I'm okay if you think otherwise. I don't think you're necessarily evil if you disagree with me. I think reasonable people can disagree. And I think that we should have a conversation about this and we should talk about it to see why you think otherwise. And if you agree with me, great. I'm glad I was able to, give you another, hi that someone agrees with me. So that's all I have to really say. I think however you vote tomorrow, I hope you have a great week. I hope you have a great next 2 years. We'll see what happens. I plan on maybe watching the election results with my buddies. We'll see. I do think that, I'm not going to say anything more. I'm going to wait until the election results before I cast any aspersions. But we'll see what happens if the Democrats lose this. If they don't do as well as they think, then I'll know I was right if the tantrum comes. And if they win, and if they do well, and there's no tantrum on the other side, and then again, that's kind of tells me that I maybe made the right choice. So we'll see. I don't think it's the end of the world. Hopefully not. And have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Bye.